The meeting was already running 20 minutes over when the door to the 42nd floor swung open and Marcus walked in. He was not supposed to be there. He knew that. The cleaning cart he pushed ahead of him, the grey uniform he wore with the name badge clipped above his chest pocket, the blue rubber gloves still on his hands because the executive restroom had needed attention, and he had not wanted to lose time going back to the supply closet. All of it said plainly that he had made a wrong turn, that he belonged somewhere else, that whoever had let him onto this floor by mistake was going to hear about it from someone in a very expensive suit. Marcus stopped just inside the doorway. He did not flinch. 15 people sat around a conference table the length of a school bus. Floor-to-ceiling windows behind them showed the Atlanta skyline shining in the late afternoon light, all glass and copper and haze. At the head of the table stood a man in a grey blazer, pointer in hand, gesturing at a chart projected on the wall that showed a steep red line descending like a cliff. The man paused mid-sentence when he saw Marcus. Everybody turned. What happened next? Nobody in that room would fully agree on afterward. They would argue about the wording, about exactly how long the silence lasted, about whether Marcus had asked for permission or simply walked to the whiteboard along the far wall and uncapped a marker as if he had been thinking about this for a very long time and had simply run out of patience for waiting. Each person in that room, when they described the moment later, described it slightly differently, the way people describe anything that catches them completely off guard. The details shifted. The sequence blurred. Some said he said nothing before he went to the board. Some said he asked permission first and was so quiet about it they almost missed the question. Every single one of them agreed on what he wrote, and every single one of them would remember the moment the room understood what it meant. Marcus Webb had been cleaning that building for 11 years. He had started at 29 after the auto parts plant on the south side closed and took with it the job he had worked since he was 19. He was not the kind of man who talked much about what that cost him. He had a son, Darius, who was 7 at the time, and did not yet understand that the careful way his father measured spaghetti into the pot had something to do with money. Marcus had taken the night cleaning shift at Aldrin Capital Partners because the supervisor on the phone had not asked for more than a high school diploma and a clean record, and Marcus had both. The pay was $14 an hour. The shift ran 11 at night to 7 in the morning, and it suited him because it meant he was home when Darius woke up for school. He had not planned to stay 11 years. Nobody plans that. The building was 44 floors of glass and steel in Midtown, the kind of address that showed up in business magazines with captions about innovation corridors and the new Atlanta economy. Marcus had learned it the way you learn any place you spend the night in, 5 nights a week. He knew which elevator had the sticking door on the left side, which conference room on the 31st floor had a heating vent that hummed past midnight and kept him company, which executive left a half-eaten meal on his desk because he had worked straight through dinner and his assistant had not come back to clear it. He learned the building the way the building never learned him. He was, to most of the people who shared it with him, part of the furniture, part of the wallpaper, invisible in the particular way that people in uniforms are invisible to people in suits. He cleaned the offices of people who earned in a single bonus more than he made in 5 years. He did not begrudge them this. What he noticed over time was the particular shape of their errors, the way that certainty at a certain level of income produces a specific kind of blind spot, the assumption that the important information will always arrive through the right channels and announce itself clearly. He had watched enough of their presentations to understand that the channels were frequently wrong and the announcements were frequently confused, and that the most important thing happening in a meeting was often the thing nobody said out loud. He did not resent this either, or not exactly. It was more like the feeling of standing outside a building in the rain and watching people eat in a warm restaurant, not hunger exactly, something more specific than that, a precise awareness of the distance between where you were and where the warmth was, held without self-pity, because self-pity was a luxury he had not budgeted for. He did not resent this, or rather he had decided long ago that resentment was a tax he could not afford to pay. Or rather he had decided long ago that resentment was a tax he could not afford to pay. He had Darius to raise and the boy was worth every hour of every night. Marcus had a routine, and he held to it with the precision of someone who understands that a routine is a form of integrity. He arrived at 10:45 each night, changed in the locker room on the basement level, and signed out his cart and supplies from the stockroom. He worked top to bottom because that was the schedule, and because he was methodical by nature. The executive floors, 38 through 44, were his alone after 9 months on the job, when his supervisor Ruth had decided he was trustworthy enough and quiet enough and careful enough to be given the keys to the cabinets where the file drawers sometimes sat unlocked. He had never touched anything that was not his to touch. Ruth knew this without being told. It was the kind of thing you could tell about a person. On the 38th floor, there was an analytics team. He cleaned their desks 5 nights a week. He learned their names from the nameplates and their habits from what they left behind. One of them, a young man named Trevor, always had a stack of printouts he had been working through. Marcus could tell by the positions of the staples and the corner folds which ones he had gotten to and which he had not. Another analyst kept a framed photo on her desk of a little girl on a beach, and the photo had been there so long the sun from the east-facing window had faded its lower half. People leave the texture of their lives on their desks, and Marcus read it, not out of nosiness, but out of the same patient attention he gave to everything. He had also, in the spare hours between shifts, studied on his own. A library card cost nothing. He had found course materials from universities that put their syllabi online. He had worked through them methodically, at the pace his life allowed, without telling anyone. He did not think of himself as smart in any special way. He thought of himself as someone who paid attention when nobody expected him to. If you have ever stayed in a building overnight while the people who own it slept in their houses, you know the particular quality of attention that night work builds. The quiet is not silent. It is a listening quiet. Machines breathe, lights hum. The structural metal of a tall building makes sounds as the city cools, small groans and pings that the daytime crowd never hears because they are too busy making their own noise. Marcus had learned to work inside that quiet in a way that felt to him like a kind of thinking. His hands moved automatically and his mind was free to go wherever it needed to go, and for 11 years it had gone most often to the whiteboards. Not on purpose, not at first. The cleaning crew was supposed to erase the boards at the end of every workday. That was in the protocol. Marcus erased them. He also absorbed what was on them: numbers, equations, the architecture of financial decisions drawn in dry erase marker, dense with assumptions and targets and risk scenarios, left standing after hours like the scaffolding of a building still under construction. He had studied this material methodically, without credit, without anyone knowing or caring. Darius was 18 now. He had gotten into Georgia Tech on a partial scholarship for electrical engineering. The rest of the money was the problem. Marcus had been doing the arithmetic for 2 years, ever since Darius had sat across from him at the kitchen table and spread out the financial aid award letter with the careful hands of someone handling something fragile. $12,400. That was the gap per year between what the scholarship covered and what the university cost after room and board. $12,400 times 4 years was $49,600. Marcus had looked at that number for a long moment. Then he had looked at his son's face, which was trying very hard not to show how much this mattered. And Marcus had said, "We will figure it out," with the same tone he used for things that were not negotiable. He had taken on a second shift twice a week at a downtown hotel. He had sold the truck and bought a bus pass. He had moved the number around in his head every night while he mopped and swept and emptied and refilled, the way other people cycle through their prayers. There was a Saturday in March when Darius called him from campus to say that a classmate had mentioned a private loan that looked manageable, and could Marcus look at the terms. Marcus had looked at the terms that evening at the kitchen table, with the overhead light the way he liked it, and a cup of coffee going cold beside him. The interest rate was adjustable. He had seen enough of those buildings' presentations to understand what adjustable meant across a 4-year horizon with a student borrower and no collateral. He had folded the printout in half and set it aside, and told Darius the next day that they would find another way. He had not slept well that week. He did not show this to Darius. One night in April, finishing the buffer run on the 32nd floor at 2 a.m, he had stopped by the east-facing windows and looked out at the city. Atlanta at 2 a.m. is not quiet. The lights are continuous, the highways still moving, the whole thing lit and restless like something that refuses to settle. Marcus had stood there for perhaps 2 minutes, which was 2 minutes he could not afford to spend standing still, and he had looked at the city and thought about what it cost to live in it, and what it cost to leave it, and what it meant that his son was about to try to build something real in it. Then he had gone back to work, because standing at windows solved nothing, and he had 3 more floors to do before 7. There were forms to fill out, loan applications, conversations with banks that had not gone well. The gap stayed at $49,600. Marcus did not talk about it at work. Ruth asked him once, around the time Darius got the acceptance letter, whether he was doing all right, and he had said yes, which was the truth in every sense except the financial one. And Ruth had nodded and not pushed because she was the kind of woman who understood what a man meant when he said he was all right. That was where things stood when Marcus walked through the wrong door on the 42nd floor on a Thursday afternoon in late July. He had come up early. One of the other cleaning staff had called out sick, and Ruth had asked Marcus to start at 3 instead of 11 to get the upper floors done before the evening board of directors meeting. He had said yes because he always said yes when Ruth asked him something, and because the extra hours would translate to a little more money, and because he did not know how to leave an unfinished floor. The 42nd floor conference room was at the end of a corridor past 3 glass-walled offices. Marcus had assumed it would be empty. The calendar posted outside the room showed a meeting scheduled from 8 in the morning until noon, and it was now nearly 3:30. He had not checked whether the meeting had run long. He pushed the door open and the cart's front wheel caught the carpet edge and he stepped in to free it and looked up. 15 people, a presentation in progress. A man at the head of the table who stopped mid-word and stared. Marcus did not flinch. He steadied the cart, said, "My apologies," and prepared to back out. He looked at the whiteboard to his left because he had been looking at whiteboards in that building for 11 years, and the look was as automatic as breathing. The formula in the upper left corner stopped him the way a wrong note stops a musician. The rest of the room receded. He stood there for perhaps 2 seconds, long enough for the man at the head of the table to say something to him that Marcus did not fully hear. He said quietly, "I'm sorry to interrupt. I'll come back." He started to turn the cart around. The man in the grey blazer said, "Hold on." Something in the formula had caught the executive's eye at the same moment, or perhaps he had simply noticed where Marcus was looking. He said, "You see something?" The room went very still. There are moments that arrive without warning, that have no precedent, that offer no instruction for how to proceed. Marcus had had a few of them in his life, the night Darius's mother left, the morning the plant closed, the morning Darius laid out the financial aid letter. He had learned to take those moments directly, without flinching and without theatrics, and to make the clearest decision available to him. He said, "The sign on your second term, it's flipped." Nobody moved. The man in the grey blazer looked at the board. His name was Colin Hughes, and he was the Chief Strategy Officer of Aldrin Capital Partners, and he had been staring at this formula for 4 hours. 3 analysts and 2 senior partners had been staring at it with him. None of them had caught it. He looked from the board back to Marcus. He said, slowly, "Show me." Marcus set his cart against the wall beside the door. He walked to the board. He picked up the black marker from the tray. The room was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. He corrected the sign. He traced the error forward through the 2 downstream assumptions it fed into. He showed what the corrected model produced. He set the marker down and stepped back, because he understood that he was standing in a room where he had no business standing, and the appropriate thing was to make what he had done available and then remove himself from the equation. The number he had written at the end was 31% higher than the projection on the slide. Not slightly off. Substantially, materially, consequentially off, in the direction that made the most difference to the decision the table was about to make. Hughes stared at it for a long time. He said, "Who are you?" Marcus told him his name. He said he was on the cleaning crew and he had come up early to cover for a colleague. He said he was sorry for the interruption and he would come back after the meeting. He turned to go. "Webb," said Hughes. Marcus stopped. Hughes said, "Where did you learn this?" Marcus told him the truth. He told him about the library. He told him about the syllabi and the course materials, and the 11 years of reading the boards in that building. He did not tell him about Darius because Darius was not the point, and Marcus did not offer personal information to people who had not asked for it. He left the room. Nobody spoke for a moment after the door closed. Then one of the analysts said, very quietly, "He's right." What happened in that conference room after Marcus left was something none of them would discuss publicly for a while. What happened was that one of the analysts pulled up the corrected model on her laptop and ran the numbers, and the numbers came out exactly as Marcus had written them. What happened was that a presentation heading toward a set of recommendations that would have cost the company a great deal of money was quietly revised before it reached the board of directors. What happened was that Hughes sat in his chair for a long moment after everyone else had gone back to their work and looked at the name he had written on a notepad in front of him. Marcus Webb. The rest of Marcus's shift that day proceeded as shifts do. He finished the upper floors and worked his way back down in the early evening, and he was on 31 when the board of directors arrived in the lobby 12 floors above him, and he learned later that the revised presentation had been received without drama, that the board had approved a modified version of the proposal, that no one in the room had known anything about a janitor and a whiteboard and a corrected formula except the 15 people who had been in that room when it happened. He signed out his cart at 8 and took the freight elevator to the basement. He changed. He walked to the bus stop and waited in the late heat of a July evening, the city smelling of tar and cut grass and the particular dry warmth of a day that had run long. He felt something on the walk to the stop that he had not felt in a while. It was not hope, exactly. Hope was a thing he had learned to keep on a short leash because hope that ran too free could knock you down when it came back. It was something quieter, something located in the chest, like a coal that had been banked for a long time and had just felt a breath of air. He got on the bus and went home. 3 days passed. He did not mention the incident to anyone. There was nothing certain enough to mention, and Marcus was not someone who traded in speculation. He went to work on Friday night and Saturday night and Sunday night and cleaned the 42nd floor conference room each time, the whiteboard already erased by the time he arrived, blank and white under the fluorescent lights, giving nothing back. He looked at it each time the way you look at a place where something happened. Then he went on to the next room. He thought about it on the bus rides. He thought about whether he should have said anything at all, and whether saying something had been the right decision or simply the kind of impulsive thing that a person does when they have been holding something in for a very long time and a door opens unexpectedly. He came back to the same answer each time. He had seen an error, and errors in financial models of that magnitude were not trivial, and saying so had been the correct thing, regardless of what came of it. Whether anything would come of it was not something he could control. He was honest with himself about that. On the third day, Ruth called his cell phone at 2 p.m. while he was napping between shifts. She said that someone from HR had contacted her. She said that a senior executive wanted to speak with Marcus at his convenience. She said, at his convenience, in a tone that conveyed, precisely and without commentary, that she was quoting the exact phrase she had been given and found it interesting, given everything. Marcus said he could come in at 4. He came in at 4. He was shown to a part of the building he had never accessed from the main entrance before, a suite of offices on the 42nd floor, with a waiting area that had real leather furniture and a direct view of Buckhead through floor-to-ceiling glass. He sat down. He had changed into clean clothes, plain clothes, the same kind he wore for the grocery store or the bank. He was aware of the particular discomfort of being seen in a space that had been designed to signal who belonged in it. Being invisible was one thing. Being visible in the wrong register was something else. Hughes came out himself to collect him. He was shorter than he had seemed, standing at the head of the conference table. He had the contained, slightly worn look of a man who did not sleep enough and had made peace with that fact a long time ago. He shook Marcus's hand, thanked him for coming, and led him to an office with a whiteboard on one wall that was, Marcus noticed, currently blank. They sat across from each other. Hughes said, "I've been thinking about Tuesday." Marcus waited. Hughes said, "I had someone pull the night crew personnel records. I hope that's not too forward." Marcus said it was not. Hughes said, 11 years is a long time to work somewhere and not have anyone know your name. Marcus said, "People generally know what they need to know." Hughes looked at him for a moment, considering that. Then he said, "Walk me through the formula. Tell me exactly what you saw and how you knew." Marcus walked him through it. He was precise and unhurried and did not use more words than the explanation required. He described where the sign error had been introduced, what it affected, and why the magnitude of the error was significant given the specific model it was embedded in. It took about 6 minutes. When he finished, Hughes was quiet. Then he said, "We have an analytics team of 7 people on 38. 3 of them have graduate degrees from programs that I will not name because it would embarrass those programs." Marcus did not respond to this. Hughes said, "I want to make you a proposal. I want to be clear, it's not a gesture and not charity. I don't do either one. I have a problem and you appear to be part of the solution to it. One of his senior analysts had left the previous month. The role required someone who could think structurally about financial models, who could identify not just mathematical errors, but errors in the framing of the question, the kind of upstream mistake that makes every downstream answer wrong no matter how carefully the math is done. He had been interviewing for 6 weeks. He had not found what he was looking for. He offered Marcus a paid 2-week trial at his current pay rate. No obligation on either side. If it did not work out, Marcus returned to his current position and nothing was said about it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He thought about 11 years of reading those boards. He thought about the library on Auburn Avenue and the carol by the window where he had worked through a risk modelling textbook over the course of 4 months. He thought about all the mistakes he had seen and had never been asked about and had never offered. He said, "What does the permanent position pay?" Hughes told him. Marcus heard the number and was still. The number was more than triple what he made across both jobs. It was the kind of number that changes the shape of arithmetic you have been doing for 2 years. He kept his face, as he always kept his face, level and attentive. And he said, "What time do you need me?" If there is a moment that comes for some people after a very long time of working in the dark, when the door opens and the light comes in and what you built in the margins of your life turns out to matter, Marcus had his. He did not show it then. He showed it later, alone on the bus, going home, looking out the window at the city going gold in the early evening, when he sat very still and let himself feel what it meant. The 2 weeks were not smooth. He was honest with himself about that. He had the knowledge, built piece by piece over years, but he didn't have the professional language or the formatting conventions or the quick institutional reflexes of someone who had been educated inside a place like this from the beginning. There were moments in the first week when the gap between what he understood and what he could demonstrate felt wide and visible, and he was aware of being watched in a way that was not entirely comfortable. He had been aware of being watched his whole life. He knew what to do with it. He paid attention. He asked precise questions. He did not ask questions when he could figure out the answers by watching. He listened to the way the team talked about problems before he offered any opinions about those problems, because in his experience, the most important thing to understand about any system was not the technical content, but the hierarchy of what mattered to the people inside it. There was a moment on the 4th day when one of the senior analysts, a man named Derek, who wore his credentials in the particular way of someone who had been told they were exceptional since he was 17, set a model in front of Marcus and asked him what he saw in it. The question was a test. Marcus understood that. He took his time. He looked at the model carefully, not because he needed more time to see what was wrong with it, which took about 30 seconds, but because he wanted to understand the shape of the mistake before he named it, because the shape told him something about how the mistake had been made, which was the more interesting question. He said, "The correlation assumption in the 3rd variable is holding steady across the projection window. But in the underlying data from the last 4 quarters, it hasn't held steady. It's drifted consistently in one direction." Derek looked at the model. He looked at Marcus. He did not say Marcus was right. He turned back to his desk and pulled up the underlying data and ran a quick check. And after a moment he said, to no one in particular, in the tone of a man who has found something he would prefer not to have found. He did not say anything else about it. Marcus went back to his work. The second week was different in a way that was hard to name precisely. The difference was not in anything said. It was in the small adjustments you learn to read in any environment where you have been paying close attention for long enough. Priya started copying him on the preliminary analysis threads rather than the final summaries, which meant she trusted him with the work before it was cleaned up, which meant something. The way Derek stopped asking test questions and started asking real ones, in the matter-of-fact tone of someone who has quietly reclassified you and is moving on. The way the 3rd analyst on the team, a quieter man named James who had been carefully friendly in the manner of someone reserving judgment, left a research paper on Marcus's desk one morning without comment, as if Marcus would know why it was relevant. He did. By the end of the week, Derek asked him 2 more questions, in the manner of a man who had decided to be pragmatic about something he could not immediately categorize. Priya, one of the junior analysts, had more work than she could carry. She started stopping by the desk where he was working and asking questions she framed as thinking out loud, as if the questions were casual. They were not casual. He answered them carefully, without condescension and without making the exchange into anything it needed to announce itself as. By the end of the first week, they had fallen into a working rhythm that felt to him like something that had been waiting to happen. The way sometimes you walk into a room and understand immediately how the furniture should be arranged, even though nothing told you. By the end of the second week, Hughes came into the conference room where Marcus and Priya and 2 other analysts had been working for 3 hours, and he stood in the doorway and looked at the whiteboard. And he was quiet for a long moment. He said, "Webb, my office at 4. He offered Marcus the permanent position that afternoon, the salary, the benefits, the professional development budget. Marcus said he would like to sleep on it. He went home on the bus. Darius was not there. He was working his summer job, bussing tables near campus. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with the number written on a slip of paper and thought about everything it would change and everything it would not change, and about what it meant that a building he had spent 11 years in had not known his name until a cleaning cart's front wheel caught on a carpet edge and sent him through the wrong door at the wrong time. He thought about his father, who had worked 31 years in a warehouse on the west side and had told Marcus, when Marcus was 11 years old and had done something quietly right when nobody was watching, that the work you do in the dark is the only work that tells the truth about you. He thought about that for a long time. Darius came home at 10, smelling of dish soap and the end-of-shift cleaning rush. He dropped into his chair at the table and saw the slip of paper with the number on it. He said, "What's this?" Marcus told him. Darius looked at the number. He looked at it for what seemed like a full minute, and then he looked at his father, and he was 18 years old and had Marcus's eyes and his mother's mouth. And in that moment, he looked very young and very old simultaneously, the way children do when they understand for the first time how much something cost. He said, "Dad." Marcus said, "Don't make a big deal out of it." Darius said, "I am going to make a big deal out of it." He accepted the position the following morning. His first day on the 38th floor was the first Monday of August. He arrived at 7:45. He wore the same plain clothes he wore everywhere. He did not have a briefcase. He had a notebook, a pen, and the kind of attention that 11 years in that building had sharpened to something very fine. Ruth had embraced him when he told her. She was not an emotional woman in any demonstrative sense, but she had held on for a moment longer than a handshake required. And when she let go, her expression was the expression of someone who has been hoping for a particular thing for a long time and is trying not to show how much it matters that it came true. She said, "You call me if they give you any trouble." He said he would. He thought about her kindness the whole bus ride in. He thought about the morning she had offered him the executive floors, 8 years ago, not making a ceremony of it, just handing him the extra keys and saying she thought he was ready. And she was right. He thought about the small things she had done over the years that she would not have called kindness, but that were. She had covered for him the one time he had missed a shift when Darius was sick, telling the HR coordinator who came down twice a year that Marcus was the most reliable person on the crew, and she did not want to lose him. Things said in passing that he had no way of knowing about and learned only later. The people who hold your life steady while you are building something rarely announce themselves. They just keep showing up, and you keep showing up, and after long enough, that is its own kind of proof of something. Marcus showed up. Kindness keeps a long memory. That is what Marcus would have said if you had asked him in those first weeks on the 38th floor what he had learned from all of it. Not that the world is fair, because it is not. Not that hard work always gets rewarded, because it does not. But that kindness offered freely and sustained across time creates a record that the world eventually has to reckon with, even when no one intends it. He was careful about that floor. He knew those people's habits, but they did not know he knew, and he was thoughtful about which of his knowledge he made visible and at what pace. He was not naive about the social architecture of a place like that, the ways that being hired from outside the usual channels could be used against someone, the ways that being too obvious about his 11 years of invisible education could read as a reproach. He moved through the work as he had always moved through everything, steadily, precisely, without calling attention to the machinery. Priya became a genuine colleague within a month. The other analysts came around more slowly, some with more grace than others, all of them arriving eventually at the simple fact of the quality of his work, which did not require commentary or narrative to make itself understood. 2 months after he started, Hughes called him in and told him that the board had approved a new scholarship program for employees and their dependents. It was one of a series of changes that had come from a broader review of how the company assessed talent and what assumptions it had been making for a very long time about where talent was likely to be found. The first scholarship was awarded to a student in the electrical engineering program at Georgia Tech. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Marcus signed for it at the door at 7 in the morning, still in his jacket from the bus. He stood in the entryway and looked at the envelope. It was addressed to Darius. Marcus set it on the kitchen table beside Darius's coffee cup in a place where his son would see it first thing. Then he made coffee and sat down across from where the envelope lay and waited. Darius came down at 7:30, barefoot, hair still uncombed, pulling the Georgia Tech hoodie over his head. He stopped when he saw the envelope. He looked at it. He looked at his father, who was drinking his coffee and looking at the table. He picked it up. Darius read it once. Then he read it again, slowly. The way you read something when, the first time through, you did not let yourself fully believe it. He set it down on the table. He looked at his father. He said nothing for a moment. Marcus drank his coffee. He picked up his phone and called his father, who was already on the bus, already watching the city come awake outside the window. Darius said nothing for a moment when Marcus answered. Then he said, "The whole 4 years." Marcus said yes. He could hear his son's breathing change. He could hear the apartment around him and the city beyond the window and something that was very close to the sound of a weight being set down. Darius said, "How did this happen?" Marcus thought about a cleaning cart catching on a carpet edge. He thought about a formula on a whiteboard. He thought about 11 years of nights and a library card and a father who told him that the work you do in the dark is the only work that tells the truth about you. He said, "You just keep paying attention." Darius was quiet for a moment, then he laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that takes you by surprise, that floods in when something you have been bracing against simply is not there anymore. Marcus rode the bus the rest of the way to Midtown. He sat by the window and watched the city come fully into the morning, the glass towers going warm with the light, the streets filling with the ordinary motion of a day beginning. He thought about his son's laugh. He thought about his father's hands, steady and unhurried, at work in a warehouse he had never complained about, building something in the particular way of men who understand that building is what you do, whether or not the world is watching. He got off at his stop and walked in through the main entrance. Gerald, who had worked the lobby desk for 6 years and had nodded good morning to Marcus every night for 11 of them without ever knowing his name, looked up and said, "Morning, Webb," looking sharp. Marcus said, "Morning, Gerald." He took the passenger elevator to the 38th floor. He hung up his jacket. He opened his notebook. He uncapped his pen. He went to work. Have you ever done the right thing for years and years and wondered if anyone would ever notice? Tell us in the comments. And if Marcus's story stayed with you, there are more stories here about the people the world walked past without looking closely enough. This story is a work of fiction. All characters, companies, and events depicted are invented and do not represent any real person or organization.